Justice for all, the judicial branch. Consider as you read. What kind of federal courts did Congress establish? What kind of decisions does the Supreme Court make, and how do they affect the nation? What is judicial review, and why is it important? Equal justice under the law are the words written on the front of the United States Supreme Court building. These words remind Americans that the aim of the judicial branch is to work for justice in the nation. Justice means the fair treatment of every person. One goal of the Constitution is to establish justice. Justice is the right of every American. Although the judicial branch has fewer workers than the other branches, this branch makes important decisions that have long-lasting effects on the nation. Vocabulary for this section. Appealed. Sent to a higher court for another decision. Overturn. To change or reverse. Due process. The correct process that should be followed in law and is designed to protect someone's legal rights. The federal court system. The Constitution established only one court for the nation, the Supreme Court. It gave Congress the power to establish lower federal courts. It also allowed the states to create their own court systems. Since 1789, Congress has created several different kinds of federal courts. The first Congress created district courts for the nation. There is at least one district court in each state. District courts are trial courts in which juries hear evidence about crimes against the federal government. The nation also has 11 courts of appeal. These courts were established by Congress in 1891 to decide whether or not the decisions made by the district courts followed due process. Decisions made here are final unless the case is appealed to the Supreme Court, which rarely happens. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the nation. The Supreme Court can overturn decisions made by lower courts. Decisions made by the Supreme Court are final. They cannot be appealed to another court. Federal judges are always appointed by the President of the United States with approval by the Senate. The President usually appoints justices who belong to his political party and share many of his ideas. Judges in district courts, courts of appeal, and the Supreme Court are allowed to serve lifetime terms. Since judges do not have to think about being elected to office, they can make decisions without worrying whether they will please or anger the voters. The Constitution does not list requirements for becoming a federal judge, but most of these judges are lawyers. Many have served in their state courts and in Congress. The President tries to appoint people who are able to interpret the law and make fair decisions. The Supreme Court at work. 9 judges decide the cases of the United States Supreme Court. Supreme Court judges are called justices. The head of the Supreme Court is called Chief Justice. Supreme Court justices meet from October through June. During that time, about 4,500 cases are appealed to the Supreme Court. However, the justices have time to hear only about 200 of them. They try to choose the most important cases that require decisions based on the Constitution. The Supreme Court justices study each case and then vote on a decision. A majority vote is needed for a decision. Then the justices publish written opinions about the case that explain why the decision was made. These decisions establish precedents for judging future court cases. Note: precedent means guidelines or examples to be followed in the future. Justices make 4 different kinds of decisions on cases that are brought to the Supreme Court. First, justices decide whether the laws of Congress are constitutional. Second, the Supreme Court can decide if state laws are constitutional. Third, the court can decide if a president's actions, such as Nixon's actions about Watergate, are constitutional. Fourth, the court can decide on how to settle problems between 2 states. For example, in 1962, the Supreme Court decided that it was unconstitutional to require students to say certain prayers in public schools. This decision was based on separation of church and state described in the First Amendment. The 1962 Supreme Court decision explained how to apply the First Amendment to the nation's public schools. The importance of judicial review. Note: judicial review, the right of the Supreme Court to find government actions or laws unconstitutional. Judicial review is one of the Supreme Court's most important powers. Judicial review allows the Supreme Court to overturn any law that it decides is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court can overturn acts of the executive branch as well as state and federal laws. Since 1803, the Supreme Court has overturned more than 100 federal laws and more than 1,000 state laws. The power of judicial review allows the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution in new ways in order to meet the needs of a changing nation. It also allows the Supreme Court to reverse previous Supreme Court decisions. Decisions made by judicial review sometimes affect history. For example, two major cases, Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. Topeka Board of Education, affected the civil rights and freedom of millions of African Americans. Both cases were interpretations of the same clause in the 14th Amendment. This clause says that states cannot deny people the equal protection of laws. How did judicial review of these two cases force many states to change their laws? Note: segregation, the separation of people based on race. In the 1896 case called Plessy v. Ferguson, the Supreme Court used the 14th Amendment to allow segregation. A segregation law in Louisiana separated African American people and white people in trains. In 1896, the Supreme Court ruled that this law was unconstitutional if the separate places for African Americans were of equal quality to the places for whites. After that, many states used the decision to pass segregation laws. However, no one enforced the laws to make sure the places were equal. They were often not. Note: desegregation, ending the separation of people based on race. In 1954, in a case called Brown v. Topeka Board of Education, the Supreme Court reversed the 1896 decision. It used judicial review to overturn segregation laws. The 1954 decision said separate schools for African Americans and whites could never be equal, and the 14th Amendment makes all segregation laws unconstitutional. Based on that decision, many desegregation laws were passed. States no longer have separate schools, trains, and restaurants for different people. The judicial branch and democracy. The framers of the Constitution planned the judicial branch as a part of separation of powers. The judicial branch can prevent the abuse of power by Congress and the executive branch by declaring their laws and actions unconstitutional. The Constitution protects our freedom by giving every American the right to due process. Americans who do not receive due process in trials in lower courts can appeal to higher courts and even to the Supreme Court. This graph shows the different pathways a case could take to get to the Supreme Court.